first speakers, those who will open our conference. And first of all, because the organizers of the conference are Institute of Economics of the Russian Academy of Sciences and National Committee on BRICS Research. So first of all, I will be very glad to introduce Elena Lenchuk, the director of the Institute of Economics of the Russian Academy of Science. Elena Borisovna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends. It is my great pleasure to welcome you in this international conference, National Strategies of Common Agenda for the Post-COVID-19 Recovery in the BRICS countries. This conference is held by the Institute of Economics of the Russian Academy of Sciences in cooperation with the Russian National Committee of BRICS countries, BRICS Research. And I would like to say a few words about our institute. The Institute of Economics is the oldest organization which conducts research in the theory and practice of economic development. And last year, our institute celebrated its 19th anniversary. And in our studies, we also pay great attention to the study of international experience in economic development, especially the countries with transforming economies. And today our conference is attended by the colleagues not only from Russia, but also from the BRICS countries. And I see all of you on my computer screen, and I want to thank all of you for joining us, our conference in this difficult time during the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you are staying safe and well. And it's worth mentioning that the topic of our conference is very relevant and concerns all of us because the COVID-19 pandemic has affected nearly all countries and over 120 million people worldwide. We have lost almost 8 million people, and beyond the health and human tragedy of the coronavirus, it is widely recognized that the pandemic triggered a serious economic crisis. The nature of this crisis is unprecedented. Beyond the short-term repeated health and economic shocks, the long-term effects on human capital, productivity, behavior may be long-lasting. According to experts, many economies will not be able to recover their 2019 output level until 2022 or maybe 2023. And the second and possible third wave of the epidemic further enhances the uncertainty of future recovery. And you know, national governments are now taking a number of serious measures to mitigate the effects of this crisis. However, it seems to me that today we need to think not only about the current measures to support the population and business, but also about how countries can enter the trajectory of sustainable growth in the future. And today we are focusing on the experience of BRICS countries, and we will also discuss what measures to take to combat the pandemic and crisis we can implement together. I believe the exchange of views on these subjects is extremely important for us. I want to note that our institute carries out the research devoted to the pandemic crisis, assessing the government measures to overcome it, define the way for transition to a new model of sustainable development in post-crisis time. We have prepared a special report which you can find on the website of our institute. And now we are currently working on the second version of this report, taking in account the result of government's work over the last year. And for today, I propose to discuss the most pressing economics problems concerning national strategies for the post-COVID-19 recovery of the BRICS countries. I know our speakers have profound expertise in this subject, and I am looking forward to many interesting discussions. Thank you again for joining us and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena Borisovna. And now let me give the floor to the second organizer of our conference, the representative of Russian National Committee on BRICS Research, acting director of this organization, and also vice president for international relations of Far Eastern Federal University, Dr. Victoria Panova.
Thank you so much, Professor Golovnin. Thank you for your wonderful words, Professor Linchuk. It is my utmost pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to see and welcome you all at this extremely important conference. I believe, despite the pandemic and despite all the difficulties and geopolitical tensions that we've had rising over the last year, when Russia had to undertake their chairmanship of the BRICS, I think we nevertheless managed to not only show very interesting, very relevant results, which were already discussed earlier, but we managed to show that BRICS are a consolidated entity, that we are that in the difficult times, when some other countries are not managing even to come to common decisions or common approaches, we can come up with common solutions. We are ready to support each other. And among such areas, we could see, and Natalia Sapran probably would be talking about the economic partnership strategy of the BRICS countries 2025, with the new one that was taken, counterterrorism strategy, a number of other decisions in order to uphold the economy of their BRICS countries. I think a new development bank of the BRICS was the best international institution that showed results. Up to $7 billion were distributed in order to support the economies of the BRICS countries to counter the COVID-19 consequences. So there are a lot of good things that BRICS are doing, and it is really great to see that Indian chairmanship is continuing, is showing continuity and solidarity, and the agenda that we are witnessing is really something that will show that we will continue to show the high class and take the new heights. As a representative, as their managing director of their National Committee on BRICS Research and the head of their last year's BRICS Expert Council, I can say that we were working really in tandem and cooperation with our ministries in order to offer all the expert support. And one more time, thank you to our BTTC colleagues for showing solidarity and offering valuable ideas for the last year that will be continued into this year and beyond with the BRICS Think Tank Council. That said, I know that I would not be taking long to give an opening remarks. I think we have people who will give essence to the start of our conference that are really doing the blood and flesh of the BRICS activities. And I will be leaving my speech in here and will be looking forward to hearing our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Economic Development representative with that. Thank you so much, and good luck for the conference.
Thank you, Dr. Panova. And as you have already introduced, actually, we have also here very important so-called practical specialists from the ministries of Russian Federation, because Russia was the president in BRICS during last year. And let me give the floor to Dr. Natalia Stapran, Director of the Multilateral Economic Cooperation and Special Projects Department in the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation.
Dear colleagues, dear organizers, Elena Borisovna and Victoria, very nice to see you virtually again. Thank you for inviting to address you this time again. On behalf of the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation, I would like wholeheartedly to welcome the topic of today's discussion and to wish all the best to the speakers and to wish you a fruitful discussion. Because, you know, even during our presidency, during ministerial meetings, we underline especially the importance of discussing national plans and strategies between BRICS countries to come to common agenda, to find the common ground, to exchange best practices, and to find the best solutions from this very awful and difficult period of pandemic of COVID-19. So this step is really important for us, and as all of us feel the previous year posed a very severe challenge not only to BRICS but to the world in general, and the COVID-19 pandemic affected all economic sectors, including industrial production, trade and economy relations, investment, and most importantly, services, air traffic, and tourist flows, and with special impact on small and medium enterprises. Not speaking not only about the economy, we feel that people's lives are very strictly influenced by COVID. So that's why we need to pay special attention to the most vulnerable groups of people in our countries. Our ministry, besides being responsible for international multilateral organizations, is responsible for developing the national strategy of recovering the national economy. I would say that the plan was developed last year in the beginning in spring, and our Minister Reshetnikov during the BRICS ministerial meeting made a very big presentation of the measures, of concrete measures, as far as the other economic ministers did. China, Brazil, India, all of us shared this experience a year ago. I guess those presentations are available and can be shared, and it's very interesting to feel and understand what are the changes. And at this moment, we even can say what are the results of those national programs. As for Russia, I would humbly say that the recovery is going on. We hope to reach the numbers by the pre-COVID numbers, the numbers from the end of 2019, in the end of this year, and to show some growth of economy. And that's all the measures which were undertaken by Russia proved to be successful. But I won't go into details on my side. I'm very interested on looking and listening to the presentations prepared for today's discussion. I just only want also to point out that one of the results of the Russian presidency in BRICS last year was the economic partnership strategy until 2025, BRICS economic strategy. And when we developed this strategy, we figure out 3 key areas which should be mentioned and discussed by all 5 countries. Those are traditional one, trade, finance, and investment, digital economy as a whole, and sustainable development. And all those parts are already in the text of the strategy. And I would like again to thank all the colleagues from both governmental and academic society from all 5 countries who made a big input to this, to the development and to the very hard work within this strategy. And the importance of these 3 parts proved to be very realistic. I hope that national measures are already included in the text of the BRICS economic partnership strategy, and we will be ready to discuss the results, the ongoing results, during the Indian presidency. I very welcome the initiatives from Indian side to work harder and to show practical results of the strategy this year. So my hope is that today's academic meeting will also be very valuable input to the development and realization of the economic BRICS strategy 2025. So let me wish you all the best and successful and fruitful discussion for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia Valerievna. And now we turn to our Russian ministry, Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and it's a great pleasure for me to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pavel Knyazev, Ambassador at Large and Russian Sous Sherpa in BRICS, a very important person in this organization.
Thank you very much. It's first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to join this important event to address such a distinguished audience, which will be dealing with the key challenge for BRICS countries and for the world as a whole. The virtual format of our meeting is a striking example of the significant change the world has experienced in the past year due to this COVID pandemic. Online formats have become the new reality, unfortunately, almost the new normal. Though we always underline and stress that they cannot replace traditional means of communication, traditional means of diplomatic dialogue, that the need for face-to-face communication, personal touch, so to say, and I think it applies not only to diplomacy, but also to the academic exchanges like today. COVID-19 pandemic on one hand made each and every one of us to literally put on masks, but on the other, it unmasked the world itself by exposing previously existing, not always acknowledged problems like fragility of production chains, inability or economy systems, instability of economy systems, and need for innovations. It made us all rethink approaches and pushed the humankind one step closer to the global restart button. Though I think it's obvious that we're still to define in what way this restart button should work. But COVID-19 crisis made evident such negative aspects like and they are not only repercussions of this crisis, but they existed before and were exacerbated by this pandemic. The further fragmentation of the international political and economic landscape, exacerbation of the competition between states, double standards, increased application of unfair competition practices, despite the humanitarian crisis, unilateral sanctions, politicization of the humanitarian cooperation, protectionism, and the quite widely used term these days, the so-called vaccine wars, which all negatively impact the international cooperation nowadays. We think that BRICS managed to go through these difficult and dark times with dignity and readiness to deal proactively with unprecedented challenges, doing so in a united and a committed way to building a better future for our peoples. Despite all existing difficulties, BRICS not only continued to work efficiently, but demonstrated the ability to resist adversity, resistance to viruses, you can call it, and the last year showed or could be considered a clear proof of the strong positive momentum in BRICS coherent interaction based on continuity and the strengthening of our strategic partnership in all three key pillars of cooperation: policy and security, economy and finances, cultural and people-to-people contacts. During the Russian year in BRICS, we all together accomplished a lot. There have been 130 events, including 25 ministerials. The pinnacle, of course, being the virtual 12th BRICS summit in November. BRICS confirms that it stands firm to continue on what it has been started in previous years and to contribute to the implementation of the new initiative intended to promote our collaboration in vital areas that would help us and the world at large to overcome the severe crisis in the midst of which the world was inevitably forced to find itself as a consequence of COVID-19 pandemic. Russia fully supports the Indian chairship in its priorities and in what New Delhi defined this year with the motto BRICS at 15, intra-BRICS cooperation for continuity, consolidation, and consensus. Unsurprisingly enough, one of the current key BRICS priorities is healthcare. Last year, BRICS countries published a consolidated document, BRICS countries measures taken in the field of healthcare to counter spread of the coronavirus disease, and started working on the initiative that our chair proposed on the establishment of an integrated early warning system for preventing mass infectious diseases risks and reaching understanding on the in the field of regulation of medical products for human use. We support consistently the earliest launch of the BRICS Vaccine Development and Research Center as decided in Johannesburg Declaration. This initiative of South Africa could not be more relevant than today, especially in light, well, in the context of the common plans of BRICS countries to strengthen cooperation in the area of vaccines. And we would like to take advantage of the fact that three of BRICS countries are recognized leaders in developing and production of COVID-19 vaccines. There have been also recently reports of 2 Brazilian centers coming up with vaccines and applying for their registration in Brasilia. And also, we all know of the vast experience accumulated by South Africa in this area. Enhanced collaboration on vaccines has a strong potential to become a valuable asset on our way to more efficient healthcare systems of BRICS countries. I fully support and echo what has been just said by Director General Stapran on the importance of the economic, further enhancing economic cooperation between our 5 countries, and the importance of the implementation of the strategy for BRICS economic partnership till 2025 agreed last year. And in this context, we look forward and support the proposals of the Indian chairship to work this year a plan of action in order to coordinate our actions of our 5 countries in this area. Last year highlighted the need to address a multitude of cross-dimensional, multi-agency growing challenges that BRICS countries and others face today. It's in particular in the economic area where quite often it's difficult to organize or coordinate different actors in our 5 countries with the architecture not always coinciding. In this context, we think that a valuable tool could be creation of a BRICS post-COVID-19 ad hoc working group on sustainable economic development that would, in our view, should be a platform for better coordinating and promoting joint efforts toward ensuring smoother and quicker economic recovery, achievement of sustainable economic growth. I would like also to mention the importance and the valuable contribution of the new development bank that was to our common efforts to combat COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, the timely establishment of its emergency COVID-19 response program worth $10 billion to be used for financing anti-pandemic measures, paying health workers, purchasing medical equipment and protective equipment, developing vaccines, as well as supporting government measures to ensure economic resilience and recovery after this global crisis that affected so much all our 5 countries. Of course, the BRICS cooperation is not limited to only the second economic and financial pillar, but taking into account the theme of the today's conference, I will not dwell too much on the other 2 in particular, or including the policy and security cooperation, which we know will be taken forward by the current Indian chairship. In particular, I would like to mention only the proposal of New Delhi to work out an action plan based on the BRICS counter-terrorism strategy adopted last year. but we all know that diplomatic and political cooperation, as many wise academics said, are always based on economic cooperation. And I would like to wish good luck and good results to this conference. We also look very much forward to the thoughtful contributions of all participants to today's discussions, which would be an important input to our cooperation in BRICS, and is reflective of the good tradition of cooperation between different tracks in BRICS, between the government track and also the academia track. Good luck once again, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to address this very interesting and promising conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel Ruslanovich. And as now the leading role in BRICS has already come to India this year, so it's a great pleasure for me to introduce the keynote speech of Ambassador Vishwanathan, the distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, one of the leading research organizations in India. So, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And first of all, let me thank the organizers, the Institute of Economics, Russian Academy of Sciences, and Russian National Committee on BRICS Research for inviting me and making me the keynote speaker, which is a very rare privilege and honor for me. And I really relish this role. I also congratulate the two organizers for this timely conference, because a lot of seminars have been held in the last few months, but still not enough to generate enough ideas, particularly in this time of COVID. And the part 2 of this conference after my keynote is a panel discussion on COVID and the recovery. And I'm looking forward to hearing some very important views from such an eminent galaxy of speakers. Now, the subject given to me for speaking for 10 minutes was Indian presidency in BRICS in 2021. I'll be very brief and make a few points which are of utmost importance to India as the chair. And of course, BRICS, as you all know, is not run by the chair, but all the 5 countries together. It's a teamwork, and that is how it has been successful so far. This is the 3rd time that India will be chairing the BRICS. The first was in 2012, and the second was in 2016. India wishes to call this event as BRICS at 15. That is the 15th anniversary, because the first formal meeting of foreign ministers of BRIC countries, at that time South Africa was not there, was in 2006 on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. But if you look at it, this is a very special year. There is not 1 but 3 anniversaries which are attached to this. The second is BRICS, you can call it BRICS at 20. Because if you start from the time that the term BRIC was first used by Jim O'Neill, it will be 20 years. And yet another anniversary can be called as BRICS at 10, because it was in 2011 that South Africa joined this group. So this is a very auspicious and a promising year for BRICS to take its agenda forward and achieve greater results. But one thing is certain, whether you call it BRICS at 10 or BRICS at 15 or BRICS at 20, BRICS has come a long way. And this even the objective critics of BRICS agree. Neither the G7 nor G20 have taken so many practical steps for the benefit of the common citizen as BRICS has done in the last so many years. And the biggest achievement, of course, I won't go in detail because others have referred to it, is the new development bank, which has been of great help not only to the BRICS countries, but other developing countries, and particularly during this pandemic. Now, BRICS has always worked on three pillars: political and security issues, economic and financial matters, and people-to-people interactions. When we talk of these three sectors, we have to put it in this context in 2021, because we are still in a pandemic and we have to take into account two important aspects of the pandemic. One is the health aspect, which has been referred to very well by the other speakers, of millions of people dying and more millions having suffered. And the second aspect is the economic downturn that has affected the entire global economy. So all our actions and all the future strategies have to take into account both these aspects of the pandemic. Flowing from the three pillars, India has decided to set the theme of this year's BRICS summit as the 4 C's, as we call it. That is a cooperation for continuity, consensus, and consolidation. Now, all these are very important aspects for BRICS, and BRICS has always followed these as the fundamental principles of this group. Now, continuity is actually the strength of BRICS. We have seen that the chairmanship of BRICS passes from one country to the other in a seamless fashion, and there is no discontinuity. And the ideas generated in the previous summits are followed through by the new chairs and the future chairs. And that is how BRICS has been able to achieve concrete results. Consensus has been the hallmark of BRICS. There has hardly been any note of discordant note in the discussions. And even if there are, these have been smoothened out, taking into account the larger vision and the larger strategy and the larger interest of the 5 countries. So consensus will be an important factor that India will lay stress on. Consolidation may be a new idea, but not necessarily. Every time we meet, either in the academic forum or even the government officials, they always take into account what has been proposed in the past, what has been achieved, and what has not been achieved. The idea of consolidation has come up now because India feels that it is time to prioritize some of our strategies. Over the years, BRICS has increased its agenda into many areas, with the result that some feel that we have spread out too thinly. It may be essential now to take an objective view of the most important and promising areas of BRICS cooperation and work on them. We have to assess the progress in many of these areas, and if there are impediments to the progress, we have to take steps to eliminate them. Now, within this broad theme of cooperation for continuity, consensus, and consolidation, India has decided that in its chairmanship this year, there will be 3 or 4 specific areas of particular importance to BRICS that we would like to concentrate on. The first, of course, everybody talks about is what we call reformed multilateralism. It is clear that the old multilateral system has proved to be ineffective and is out of date with no connection with the new geopolitical and geoeconomic realities of the present world. There is at the same time a global lament that multilateralism itself is losing relevance, and countries are going more and more into the bilateral and plurilateral modes. So many countries feel that we have to revive multilateralism. But India feels that in a hurry to revive multilateralism, we should not bring back the old version of multilateralism, which was already discredited. It is a golden opportunity to bring in new ideas to multilateralism and probably introduce a multilateralism 2.0, which will be truly democratic, truly representative, and truly inclusive. And I feel that there is no other grouping in the world today like BRICS, which can take the leadership in this great endeavor. The second theme has already been mentioned by the Sue Sherpa and also by Dr. Panova, that is international security with concentration on counterterrorism. This will be a crucial issue of interest to all the 5 countries. India would like to see the counterterrorism strategy finalized in the Moscow summit to be followed up, eventually leading to the adoption of a comprehensive international convention on terrorism by the UNGA. There is need for cross-border frameworks for illegal flows of capital, money laundering, and violent extremism. The third focus of importance will be on digitalization for the delivery of public goods. Now, 5-10 years ago, this entire digital technology was thought of as a rich man's game, or a kind of technology that will benefit the elite and the upper echelons of society. BRICS countries, to a certain extent, have proved this to be wrong. We have worked on digitalization for the benefit of the bottom of the pyramid. We have seen that digitalization is the best way to deliver public goods in a transparent, non-corrupt, most efficient, and cost-effective way. So we would like to work with the other 4 countries, share experiences, and take digitalization to the most bottom of the pyramid, even in rural areas, and for sustainable development goals. Digitalization has become so essential that that is the way to empower our underprivileged sections of the society. The 4th main theme, of course, will be climate change. A lot is being talked about. There will be the COP conference in UK later this year. Now, climate change is of great importance to all the 5 BRICS countries. What we want to stress here is on climate finance, because there is a lot of financing available in the international financial market, which BRICS countries should try and get for our climate change strategies, particularly for adaptation and mitigation. In addition to the 4 main areas, of course, there will be other areas that will discuss important things like global health. Another area we have chosen where we are going to have both seminars and also it will be discussed at, in the government circles is the future of jobs and work. And here the stress will be on a move towards women-led framework and women-led development. Cooperation in technology and innovation is another area. There will also be a BRICS Economic Forum. And as always, there will be a BRICS Civil Forum also. Now, all these put together, India hopes to have close to around 100 events. That is both the track 1, that is the government, and track 2, that are non-governmental tracks put together. Of course, as in the past, under track 1, there will be interactions between ministers and top government officials in vital areas like finance, commerce, health, telecommunications, education. There will be meetings of the central bank governors, and of course, there will be the most important meetings of the national security advisors on security matters. On the track 2, we have planned at least 30 or 40 seminars on the various topics I have mentioned. There will be the Business Council, which is a great organ which provides inputs to the leaders. There will be the civil society interactions. And the most important, of course, will be the BRICS Academic Forum and the BRICS Think Tank Council meetings, which will actually make the recommendations to the leaders. Now, inputs from all these 100-odd events will lead up to the Leaders Summit, probably in September. Of course, the date has not been finalized. Now, most of these interactions I talked about will unfortunately be in the webinar mode, and it may not be physical, but some of them could even be hybrid, that is partly physical and partly virtual, seamlessly moving from one to the other. Before I end, I would like to say that, as always, India hopes and requests, looks forward to the active cooperation of the other 4 countries, both at the track 1 and at the track 2 level, to make our chairmanship successful. We have no doubt that with the help of the other 4, we can make, even though under difficult circumstances, we can make BRICS 2021 productive for our 5 countries, and we can come up with new ideas and new strategies, which will also help other developing countries. Thank you very much once again for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador Vishwanathan. And now we'll turn to our next part, and I'll present Irina Korgun, who is now the head of the Center for Russian Strategy in Asia in the Institute of Economics. And I should mention that this center is just at the topic of BRICS research in our institute, and previously it was headed by Georgi Toloraya, who is also here and who is one of the pioneers of BRICS researchers in our institute. And now Irina is also leading in this direction, so she will be the chair on our second part of the conference. Irina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikhail Yurievich. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on which time zone you are. It's really a pleasure and an honor to moderate this distinguished panel today. The speakers who previously addressed the panel have mentioned the unprecedented nature of the COVID-19 crisis. And there are many issues that need urgent attention of multilateral community, of international community, of the BRICS countries. And of course, the flow of ideas is essential to overcoming the COVID-19 crisis. And one of the underpinning ideas to organize this conference has been to initiate this flow of ideas between different levels that represent BRICS cooperation, which is governmental level, organizational level, academic level, and because we are all humans and we depend on human interaction, of course, on the people's levels. And our distinguished panelists will address many of the issues in their field of expertise. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Mikhail Golovnin, who is the first Deputy Director of the Institute of Economics at the Russian Academy of Science and an Associate Member of the Russian Academy of Science. Professor Golovnin is a big expert in the field of financial economics, international financial markets, and he will be touching upon these issues and how we can address financial challenges amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Golovnin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, just a second, just to begin. Yeah. And as you have, my expertise is international monetary and financial system, and somehow maybe it seems a little bit far from the topic of COVID-19, but I'll try to show you that this is not, and this is very important, especially from the point of view of post-COVID economic developments. So first of all, let me start from a little bit introduction of the role of the BRICS countries in global economy. These figures are based on GDP on US dollar current exchange rate, so they seem to be somehow underestimating the role of BRICS countries because of we know exchange rate regulations which are acting in them. But anyway, we can see that practically from the year 2014, they are very close to the size of the US economy, but they cannot overcome it. First of all, because of already mentioned exchange rate developments and also during this crisis. Although, of course, within this grouping, the situation is rather different. There is the Chinese economies, which ended previous year with positive results from review of economic growth, and other BRICS countries which suffered more or less economic downturn, economic crisis, and the reduction of the real GDP. Though I will focus on the impact of COVID-19 on international financial system and its prospects. And after that, I'll turn to the possible role of BRICS in these developments. Why it is so important? Because actually, if we remember, BRICS began with some of the projects on international monetary and financial issues within the G20. And it seems to me that now we should again somehow to return to these issues, although of course the agenda now is much broader, and there are other topics which of course are very important and which have already been mentioned here today, but I'll focus on this one. First of all, almost everyone had already mentioned the size of this shock connected with COVID-19 crisis. And we, in the financial system, saw this sharp shock in the spring 2020, when there was a fall in prices on risky assets. I mean, first of all, stock prices and others. And the fall of prices of commodities, and what is for Russia is important is this fall in oil prices and so on. But this shock seems to somehow to be temporary, and that's why we can see some kind of discrepancy between financial and real sector during this crisis. If we remember the previous global economic and financial crisis of 2007-9, we can remember that during that crisis, shocks came from financial sector to real sector. And this was very important, and that's why the focus was made on international financial system reform, and it lasted for years. But during this crisis, mainly shocks were connected with the real sector, and it seems that financial sector suffered less. Although we can see, again, as in each other crisis, global crisis during this century, so-called global sudden stop, when capital flows seriously diminished in the international financial system. And also we can see the capital outflow from emerging markets, which also are members of BRICS and other emerging countries. So we can see on the very serious impact on international financial system from the measures which were conducted by leading advanced economies, mostly by the US, but also by Euro area. I mean the very aggressive quantitative easing policies in these countries. So we have supported those financial markets which suffered during the initial shocks. And but those measures were the measures of selected of certain national economies. And what we have lacked, from my point of view, during this crisis is the lack of so-called collective reaction. G20 until the end of the year simply did not react to the crisis, and the main part of the reaction was the focus was made mainly on least developed countries' debt burden relief. So each country had fought with the crisis by itself, and this is also for me very important. Although we had a rather long history of international financial system reform, of G20 activity, we haven't seen the important, from my point of view, important actions from a point of view of collective reaction on the crisis. What, as I can see, could be the challenges for international financial system after this crisis? Of course, a very important challenge is the rising debt burden, both from the point of view of government debt and private debt. And of course, from that point of view, the relief of the least developed countries' debt burden is very important, but this is not, this is important for their national economies, but for the global economy, the mostly important will be the debt burden from, for advanced economies. And this will be a very important case for me. Also, the possibilities for bubbles on financial markets. The main cause, I think, will be those policies which has already supported financial markets. They, to some extent, have supported economies across the globe, but also they also have created some risks, and one of the risks could be those bubbles. I mean, first of all, US stock market and so on. We cannot see now the full picture with the bad loans problem in national and, of course, in international banking system because of a prolonged effect of these bad loans which were given during the COVID-19 crisis, and to some extent we are now hidden, but I think that this problem will develop. Now, it's somehow overlapped by this increasing liquidity both on global and national level. And now let's turn maybe to some longer term challenges, but from my point of view, they are also very important. We can see now that international financial regulation has changed, but international monetary system simply did not change. But even we can see the increasing role of the US dollar during the period from the previous global economic crisis. What will be after that crisis? Again, dollar is seen as the safe haven currency. So I think there will be a rising demand for dollars. We cannot fully see now the statistics, but I think these trends will continue. What can be the response from other countries and mainly from BRICS countries, those whose currencies to some extent, of course, are trying to compete with dollar in international monetary system. Of course, there is a very strong competition from Chinese yuan, and we now can see a very interesting process of developing the role of digital currency in international monetary system. Both so-called private international digital currencies like Bitcoin, but now the very actual topic is national digital currencies. And from that point of view, very challenging is the project of digital yuan. And it can, to some extent, the reshape of the landscape of this international monetary order. But let's see. Already some other very important problems have been mentioned, like climate change, aging population, and so on, which are very closely connected with international financial system problems. And now let's turn to the role of BRICS countries. It's now just an illustration of how exchange rate dynamics has been developing in BRICS countries. Of course, it was dependent on the policy of exchange rate policy of those countries, while India and China as usual, we have regulated the exchange rates, while Russia, Brazil, and South Africa have experienced a rather sharp downturn in exchange rates during this spring shock, which I have already mentioned, spring 2020 shock. And after that also, the dynamics of exchange rates are rather controversial. For example, we saw the appreciation in Brazil and still continuing depreciation in Russia and South Africa. So again, we can see that the impact from international capital flows, which I have already mentioned, is very important. And that's why it seems to me that it should be one of the key topics of BRICS suggestions for international financial system reform. Now, this position from the global point of view is mainly focusing on IMF, and if we look through the BRICS 2020 declaration, we can see that the IMF is seen as the main international financial institution, and a very important, of course, topic is the 16th General Quarter Review, which should, of course, give the result of increasing role of emerging market economies, including BRICS countries within the IMF. But what we can see now that BRICS countries cannot change the IMF policy, and of course there is a strong resistance from advanced economies, mainly from the US. So what seems for me is important, especially within the view of G20, where the position of BRICS countries and our emerging markets is stronger, is to focus on a common position on the international financial system reform. And of course, this reform should continue. And one of the important topics from my point of view is the need for some international mechanism for regulation of cross-border capital flows. This topic is not an acute agenda, but during the China presidency in G20 in 2016, somehow it was mentioned. But we cannot see now any serious project, while this topic is not blamed now in the international context, just to mention the so-called capital flows management term, which is used by the IMF researchers. So it is still quite important, but this crisis, as for me, again, show us that there is a need for some kind of this regulation on international level. If we look at the BRICS initiatives, of course, we can see some progress, and it is a positive sign from my point of view, though these countries cannot change now the financial landscape globally. They try to change something on their own level. Of course, we know examples of New Development Bank, of contingency reserve arrangement, and we can see now the reaction, for example, from New Development Bank to this crisis from the point of view of emergency assistance program with emergency loans, which are already in the news, for example, here in Russia. And also the focus on long-term growth, I mean, from the view of infrastructure investment, which are very important for this growth. And this is the topic of BRICS Task Force on private-public partnership and infrastructure, and its connectedness with New Development Bank. From the point of view of increasing the role of BRICS currencies in the international monetary system, which I have already mentioned, the topics of payments in national currencies, which is discussed within the BRICS Payments Task Force, and also the establishment of BRICS Local Currency Bond Fund, which for me is also very important. It's some kind of developing the example which has already been done in Asia with Asian regional bond market development. And from my point of view, this can be somehow some small steps towards the changing landscape of international monetary and financial system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Golovnin. I think you've raised very important questions in your presentation, which are the lack of international coordinated response in financial aspects of the COVID-19 crisis, and that BRICS countries have potential to create some common tools to deal with similar crises in the future. Thank you so much. I think it's very, very relevant. And now we turn to our next speaker, Dr. André de Mela e Souza, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Applied Economic Research from Brazil. So he will be talking about situation in Brazil after the COVID-19 pandemic. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Chair, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this event. As you know, the world has been undergoing an economic recession. The projected global GDP growth rate for last year, 2020, has been a little beneath 5%. 4.9 to be precise. There is some recovery expected for this year, but the fact of the matter is that this recovery depends critically on overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is no way of putting the economy, be it globally or in our own countries of the BRICS, back on track without addressing the health emergency. Now, public health, as you know, is a quintessential public good, and as such, addressing the health emergency and providing this public good requires coordination, and even more than that, it requires more sophisticated forms of international cooperation and collaboration between states. It will not do to have some countries successfully overcome the spread of the coronavirus and its impact, while others are still lagging behind. And this is part of the reason why the vaccine nationalism that we have seen thus far is so detrimental to the world economy and to the economy of all countries, including our own. Particularly in the rich Western countries, what we have seen is that they have tried to secure vaccines for their own populations, while at the same time restricting exports of these vaccines to other countries. So we have seen this in the Trump administration, when he deliberately restricted the export of vaccines from the United States to other countries. We have seen it also in the United Kingdom with regard to vaccines by British company AstraZeneca, which have actually generated tensions with the European Union. And the European Union retaliated as well, banning export of vaccines and active ingredients from its member countries, and particularly 29 million doses of also AstraZeneca vaccines that were discovered in the surroundings of Rome in Italy. Now, the new Biden administration has also been slow to cooperate in sharing vaccines. The US is arguably the country that is in the best position in terms of vaccination worldwide. It has estimated vaccines leftovers of 7 million doses, and as of yet, it has not showed willingness to share those doses with countries that needed more and that have insufficient doses to provide to their own populations, including my own country, Brazil. Now, so vaccination is key here to overcoming the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. But vaccines, as other goods, for instance, as computers and automobiles, are also produced by global production chains, meaning their production cannot rely solely on any single country alone. In particular, the production process of vaccines depends on the supply of equipment such as bioreactors, pumps, filtration units, of biochemical inputs such as cellular material, lipids, pharmaceutical substances, and of filling supplies, including machines, bottles, stoppers, and freezers. So this is another reason why this so-called vaccine nationalism and the neo-mercantilist policies that seems to guide it are so misguided. The United States is perhaps the only country in the world that has achieved self-sufficiency in this global production chains of vaccines, thanks to what was known as Operation Warp Speed. It was a colossal subsidy program that since May of 2020 has articulated a complete production chains of vaccines in the American territory. Now, no other nation is capable of replicating this operation, with the possible exception of China, and to achieve thereby self-sufficiency in the production of vaccines. At the same time, we have seen a tremendous concentration of vaccines in the rich Western countries as well. Just to give you a general number, 17% of the vaccine doses that have been applied thus far have been applied in only 10 countries. And Canada, which is the most extreme case, has 3 times more doses than its own population. So we see a situation where there's a tremendous inequality in vaccine production and distribution, and where if there is no effort to address this inequality, we will not overcome the pandemic. Because as a global public good, overcoming the pandemic requires actions to alleviate the spread of the virus everywhere, right? Now, how can this be achieved? We will need not only an increase in the global supply of immunizers, but also, for that purpose, multilateral coordination, as has already been said by previous speakers, freer trade, which goes in the opposite direction of these policies we have seen, restricting the exports of vaccines and other equipment needed to fight the coronavirus. And we also need contractual security. In the absence of these measures, pharmaceutical companies will not risk multiplying their productive capacities in a scenario in which international exchanges have become hostages to this so-called vaccine nationalism. Now, this is where the BRICS come in, and this is where I think they can play a critical role in promoting post-COVID-19 economic recovery. Most of the vaccines for the global south and their active ingredients are provided by China, India, and Russia. They're not provided by the rich Western countries, which, on the contrary, have only focused on the provision of vaccines for their own populations. Now, Brazil and South Africa have also manufacturing capabilities, and as was already mentioned, Brazil is developing its own vaccines, and there are 2 that are particularly promising. And as such, these 2 countries can become regional hubs for the supply of vaccines in sub-Saharan Africa and in Latin America. So BRICS should cooperate above all in the provision of these goods. And in doing so, they should also support the proposal that was made by India and South Africa to suspend intellectual property rights of vaccines and of other medical equipment needed to fight COVID-19 in the ambit of the World Trade Organization. Unfortunately, my government has not supported that proposal, but it is crucial if we are to provide for an expansion of the supply of vaccines. And so the situation we're in now is one where the initial expectation of a V recovery seems clearly misguided, right? And if you recall last year, this expectation was based on the assumption that, given the fact that it is the pandemic that is depressing demand, once we remove the pandemic, and this was expected to happen more or less abruptly, then the recovery would automatically come forth in an abrupt way, and again, in the shape of the letter V. but this won't happen, and part of the reason is that some countries are recovering faster than others, and so we are likely to see an uneven pace of recovery, which is bound to keep the global economy as a whole somewhat in check for the foreseeable future. And again, the fact that some countries recover and have clearly put the spread of the virus under control does not mean that their economies will not be impacted by the pandemic elsewhere. And here, the experiences of Israel and UK are particularly telling, because these countries are the ones that have vaccinated a significant proportion of their own populations, and they're relatively small populations, but the UK is not that small, and still they're still under severe restrictions, including of travel and of trade as well. So once more, global economic recovery requires addressing the pandemic everywhere. And finally, and this is my last point, we thought initially last year that the pandemic would affect primarily the demand for goods. And so it would depress the demand and thereby bring about a recession. But this is not just the case, but it is also the case that the pandemic depresses supply as well. What we have seen is that it disorganizes production chains in all sectors, and even in the national sphere, not even talking about international trade. So we see suppliers of raw materials and intermediary goods, for instance, oftentimes not knowing how much to invest and how much to produce, and not having the confidence to make investments in production because it's not clear how strong the demand will be for their supply. So to put it in a nutshell, what the pandemic has done is to disrupt the signals which producers have relied on to guide their activities. And this has disrupted supply chains, again, in all the sectors. And so this is part of the reason why it's so important to address the health crisis in order to recover the global economy. And this also illustrates how not just vaccines, but all other goods will require greater global coordination, right? It will require more open markets. It will require some form of multilateral rule-based governance to relieve production capabilities from the main bottlenecks that we see nowadays. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gemela Souza. I think that vaccine nationalism, as you mentioned, puts a lot of strain on international cooperation in many areas, not only vaccine, but also trade and investment, and impedes the overall recovery. Indeed, we are facing inequality, new type of inequality in vaccine production and distribution. And until these issues are dealt with, we won't have a sustainable recovery. So to paraphrase, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Recovery is not full until all countries recover. And indeed, cooperation in vaccine, pardon me, in vaccine production is essential here. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speakers, Professor Georgi Talaraya, the founding director of the Asia Strategy Center at the Institute of Economics and deputy chair of the board of the Russian National Committee on BRICS Research. He will be presenting a co-authored report with Valeria Gorbacheva, who has been behind this conference, inviting speakers and doing a lot of cooperation and coordination. But I'll stop here, and please, Professor Talaraya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. So I won't demand twice the time because there are two co-authors. But anyway, we'll separate our presentation in two parts. One about general things, which I'll try to present my vision of, and then about Russia's case, where Valeria will take the floor. BRICS, COVID pandemic is widely understood as a crucial test for humanity, the crucial challenge for the last 12 decades. And we should ask ourselves how BRICS as an organization, as a phenomenon, have passed this test. Well, unfortunately, not very satisfactory, I think. It doesn't matter that the Western Alliance and developed countries has passed this this test even worse, because now they regrouped their forces, and well, US more or less taken back its leadership role, while the BRICS might have lost the golden chance to unite and to be a new phenomenon in fighting these global challenges. After all, these 5 countries comprise almost half of the global population, mostly affected by the BRICS, has the potential to create vaccines and to develop joint answer, joint strategy. All this wasn't done. There were no such vaccination regimes in the Western countries, but still we have separate tracks of creating vaccines, so we don't even think about recognizing one other's vaccines and doing something together. Now we have the mechanism for the future reactions to that kind of calamities, because certainly this is not the last one. We have tried to create the vaccination center, but still we lack the vision what we can do together, the 5 of us, if such a black swan would appear again, not only in pandemics but in other things. So unfortunately, I say that we might have lost the chance, but it's still not too late to straighten up the situation and use the experience to proceed to a more coherent strategies in situations like that. However, I should say that BRICS is being challenged by many geopolitical factors. Well, my personal opinion, speaking on myself, I think that the US strategy of putting Indo-Pacific at front of its strategy and Quad is the biggest challenge to BRICS, and there might be others. But let us talk about the lessons of the pandemic and about the Russian approach. First slide, please. The immediate human and economic cost of COVID is measured in scale back years on many issues, including the sustainable goal targets like reducing poverty and inequality. According to the report which World Economic Forum have published, the highest likelihood risks in the 10 next few years are climate, weather, human-led and environmental dangers, digital power concentration, digital divide, cybersecurity failure, and also infectious diseases in the top spot, followed by climate action failure and other environmental risks, as well as weapons of mass destruction, and livelihood crisis, debt crisis, IT infrastructure breakdown, and I would also add the crisis of increasing psychological warfares and mind control, which using the global internet instruments. Next slide, please. Most likely, these factors will be more noticed in the next 2 years, which will follow the BRICS, the COVID crisis, although no one guarantees that it's will be overcome and it won't still develop. But under an optimistic scenario, still we'll see increased unemployment and livelihood crisis, youth disillusionment, digital inequality, economic stagnation, erosion of societal cohesion, terrorist attacks, And in economy, the asset bubbles, price instability, commodity shocks, and debt crisis can be expected. And of course, the growing nationalism and competition, not always friendly between countries, will only increase. And the countries have more or less given up the prospect for globalization, and we see a sort of deglobalization in the next 5 to 10 years horizon. Next slide, please. The pandemic's economic shock by increases in inequality, and the recovery won't be even. And emerging markets and developing economies are following divergent recovery paths. For example, China is better than other economies. Russia might be not so bad either. India also will do good, probably 2.7% in this year, which is very good in terms of India's success in the chairmanship of BRICS, which I sincerely wish the organizers to achieve. And still, the issue of the pandemics will be very noticeable. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of statistics, just to show the magnitude of this problem for the BRICS countries, which might be most affected among all the countries just in quantitative terms, although not per capita, but still we're speaking about millions and millions of people affected by this factor. Brazil, as of now, has 12 million cases, India almost 12, Russia 4.5, South Africa 1.5, China, well, much less, but still the countries take different strategies to find this disease. I would say that Russia is doing comparatively well, and I think Valery can speak about it more, because we have probably the highest number of tests and the earliest vaccination. Well, for example, I myself got a vaccination, well, many of our colleagues too. While when being in New York, I couldn't get it for many months, and still wouldn't have been able to do this because there's simply no vaccines. Next slide, please. What was the reaction of BRICS to this calamity? New development banks responded in timely manner by allocating $10 billion to Brazil, India, China, and South Africa to reinforce the economies for the period of the post-crisis development. And well, I would say this is a good example for the world. BRICS nations reiterated their interest in creating mechanisms for vaccines in against pandemics. And you remember that the work in this direction was ongoing for 5 years already. And I'm proud to remind that Russia was the first country to officially register the Sputnik vaccine. Largely is not ignored in the West, which shows this, well, geopolitical methods of competition. And I personally think it's still the best. One of the suggestions by Russia was to create an early warning system for epidemiological threats. Other suggestion was to develop specific steps for the legal regulation of medical products, which will improve the ability to cope with the viruses. In 2020, BRICS reached a number of practical agreements that will support BRICS economies in the recovery period. Some of examples are, well, the development of the strategy for BRICS economic partnership, which Natalia Stepran has mentioned, which is a big achievement in the Russian chairmanship. Another one is guidelines for promoting effective participation of medium and small enterprises in international trade. Trade ministers agreed to collaborate within Partner to develop technologies. They also agreed on the understanding of investment facilitation and the strengthening cooperation within promoting cooperation, enhancing transparency and efficiency. Environmental ministers agreed to promote circular economy in the context of sustainable partners of production and consumption. 19 related measures are targeted, proportionate, transparent, and temporary. They don't create unnecessary barriers to trade or disruption of global supply. In agriculture, there were certain measures in response to BRICS, and these are aimed to ensure that the difficulties the agriculture and food production experience won't become entrenched. Investment environment is agreed to be strengthened, to be facilitated in the agricultural sphere. The ministers of labor have agreed to put special attention on creation of jobs, included by those provided by the medium and micro and small size enterprises, removing barriers faced by vulnerable groups who would like to enter the labor market, and now it is, I understand, it's very difficult. And also now the research of on the support of employment and income in the context of COVID crisis is being carried out by the BRICS think tanks. Speaking about Russia, before talking about speaking about the measures which will Valeria take on, I would like to confirm that I would like to mention that our first confirmed cases were in January 2020, and they came from Italy. And since February 2020, Russia was losing around 1 billion rubles because of decrease in trade with China, which was more or less closed. Russian airlines lost estimated 1.7 billion rubles due to lack of connection with China. Tourism have taken a 27 billion ruble already by March last year, a hit from the impact of coronavirus, and Russian ruble suffered a fall hit in a 4-year low against US dollar. Soon we more or less gathered our strength, our forces, and proved, I think I'm proud to say, that our reaction to BRICS was much more operative and much more efficient than in many other countries. And now I pass the floor to Valeria to explain what was done in what order. Valeria, please.
Thank you, Professor. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Just to mention one more thing that was earlier mentioned. For today, Russia has the second highest number of confirmed cases in Europe and the 5th highest in the world after the United States, Brazil, India, and France. On the contrary, Russia occupies one of the leading places in the world according to a number of tests per 1 million. And These numbers indicate a difficult healthcare situation indeed in most BRICS countries, and in turn, a demand for strong and effective management to restore our economies. Sorry for exceeding time, but I'll try to finish very quickly. The government's anti-crisis measures in Russia announced to date amount to roughly 1.4 billion rubles, or approximately 1.2% of GDP. A figure smaller than for many OECD countries, where stimulus measures exceeded 10% of GDP. The specific economic support measures introduced by the federal and regional governments and the Central Bank of Russia largely match those introduced in other countries, with certain instruments aimed at traditional budgets, SMEs, affected sectors, and large systematically important companies. As for social protection measures, the main one are additional monthly payments to families and children and unemployed parents, possible delays in loan repayments for those who have lost 30% of their income, and increased wages and insurance guarantees for healthcare workers potentially contacting COVID-19. 200 billion rubles allocated to the regions to balance their budgets, and increased budget allocations provided social benefits to persons duly recognized as unemployed. As for measures for business support, government provided directed non-reimbursable financial assistance to SMEs in the worst affected sectors. There was also establishment of the guarantee fund for structuring credits of companies adversely affected by the deterioration of the situation due to COVID-19. Extension of the non-interest bearing credit program, and of course, support of organizations essential for the Russian economy. And one more important thing is a launch of a mortgage program with a low lending rates. Professor Tolera has already mentioned about support for SMEs. I would just like to add that last March, the Central Bank of Russia approved a 500 billion package to support SMEs. And there was also a moratorium on rental payment and inspections of SMEs, including tax inspections. One more important area is measures to foster digitalization in Russia. In our country, digital payments are already common, and COVID-19 became a significant driver or even greater use of digital finance services. The Russian authorities have urged consumers and businesses to use digital payments rather than cash to slow down the spread of the coronavirus, and advised commercial banks to limit the number of ruble notes in circulation. The Central Bank of Russia choose a number of measures to support business and digitalization in our country. And first of all, I would like to mention that the fees paid by online merchants were loaded, and banks were allowed an automatic extension of all bank credit cards, and also to open accounts remotely with simplified rules. Last September, the Russian government adopted an economic recovery plan to respond to the challenges of economic crisis, implying allocation of 6.3 trillion rubles, and there are two stages on the perspective period until 2024. So the first stage, recovery, will take the entire 2021, and the main goals are to move to a steady growth in real incomes of the population and the economy as a whole, to restore the most effective sectors, including support of SMEs, normalize the unemployment rate, and reach the level below 5%. And the second stage, which will take 2022-2024 period, will accompany such goals as GDP growth above 3% per year, real disposable income of the population about 2.5%, investment in fixed assets more than 5% annually, and non-oil and gas exports growth by 3-4%. And also, I would like to mention specific actions to achieve such results, which include development of mechanisms to support private investment, base agreements on investment protection and promotion, development of tools to support the self-employed and people employed in individual and small businesses, and there are more than 21 million those people in Russia. Introduction of transitional tax regime, which will be introduced in order to smoothly change the tax burden on growing SMEs. Of course, it's launch of a specific digital ecosystem and a single digital environment for SMEs, which has been already started by Sberbank. Launch of 2 new programs for the development of high technologies, and of course, transformation of the business climate with the new roadmaps. For today, there are 3 already registered vaccines in Russia. Sputnik V, of course, Pivac Corona and Covivac, that already started for mass vaccination. I would like to mention that Sputnik V has already been registered in more than 50 countries. And for today, it's one of the most popular vaccine from Russia. The newly one Covivac that was registered this February has already put for mass vaccination, and for today it is more suitable for older people and people with allergic diseases. And there are another 2 vaccines undertaking trials in Russia. The first one developed by China, Convidecia, and the second one from Russia on the first phase of trials. We are expecting that the clinical trials will begin this July, and it's supposed to be to bring immunity for years, not just like 1 or 2 years, but for years. And we hope that our partners from BRICS countries will also bring common clinical trials. And of course, we are ready to cooperate in this sphere. COVID-19 vaccination in Russia, I will just smooth quickly. Generally, 6.3 million people have already been vaccinated with one component across Russia, and 4.3 million of them being fully vaccinated. For example, in Moscow, 50% of those who are vaccinated are over 60 years old, and this is one of the priorities in our country, along with employed in healthcare and education, the social sphere, and people, citizens of the cities over 1 million. I would like also mention that to reach social immunity in Russia, we are needed to more than 70 million vaccinations. And of course, those who are now working on the most crucial spheres, industry spheres and army forces are in priority for vaccinations, but everyone can be vaccinated through an open and transparent system for today. So if you are a citizen or even not a citizen of Russia, you can get your vaccine freely. And so this is our conclusion for a presentation for today. I would like to mention that assessing the economic situation in Russia, most importantly, is that the impact of COVID-19 spread to the Russian economy has not resulted in a systematic crisis. The economic downturn has mostly affected the small and medium-sized business sector in a limited number of industries. The crisis also didn't spread to the backbone industries and companies. For instance, there was no expected decline in construction sector, while construction amounts have returned to the level of 2019. Overall, the negative impact to the economic situation, it turned out to significantly less than it was expected. The agro-industrial complex countries continues to grow, this is the only industry where production, export, investment, and financial results increased. Russia managed to maintain macroeconomic stability for now. Speaking about BRICS, despite difficult situation in some countries in overcoming the COVID-19, BRICS countries have built a solid foundation for further cooperation in fighting epidemiological threats. Overall, the situation inspires hope for economic process, progress and future more effective goal action to prevent the overcome health crisis and a more significant role of BRICS in this process. Closer cooperation between the BRICS would offer an opportunity to mitigate the negative effects of the crisis and to contribute to restoration of production, cross-border trade and cross-border investments, which in turn are all important factors for recovery of the global economy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Talarai. Thank you, Valeria, for highlighting both global risks and how Russia is doing under the strain of those global risks, and what initiatives Russia takes that can be also used as a basis for BRICS cooperative response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As Professor Talarai mentioned, the test of COVID-19 was great, and we don't know yet had we passed it or not. But BRICS indeed hasn't lost its golden chance to show leadership and multilateral response and to lead with that multilateral response. And now I'll pass the floor to our next speakers, Dr. Alexandra Morozkina and Ms. Natalia Krasnopreva. Natalia Morozkina is the head of the Structural Reforms Division at the Economic Expert Group, and Natalia Krasnopreva is the lead advisor at the Analytical Center for the Government of the Russian Federation. Please, Dr. Morozkina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you, Valeria, for such a positive presentation that gives us hope that we will soon have face-to-face meetings again, maybe at least in Moscow, which we missed so much during this year. One more time, thank you, Professor Talarai and Valeria, for giving such a extensive description of the policy measures packages, because my presentation will be devoted mostly to the question, what should we do? What should we do in other fields after those unprecedented packages? So my theme today is the public-private partnerships and the potential for cooperation in BRICS countries in this sphere. Public-private partnerships is only a mechanism for realization of much more broader goal, which is development of infrastructure. And this is extremely important in the case of recovery after COVID crisis, because infrastructure has a large positive impact on economic growth and is especially important in BRICS countries, as the infrastructure needs in BRICS countries are really large. And according to the estimates made by the Global Infrastructure Hub, these infrastructure needs in BRICS countries are much higher than the current infrastructure investment plans embodied in the current investment strategies of BRICS countries. And also infrastructure is a good point for cooperation in the recovery after COVID crisis, because there is already an established framework for cooperation in infrastructure. BRICS have a long history of cooperation in infrastructure, and here on this slide you can see some of the initiatives for BRICS cooperation, and one of them is our favorite strategy for BRICS economic partnership. Infrastructure was a part of a previous strategy which terminated last year, and is a part of even two parts of a new strategy for economic partnership, which is investment cooperation and cooperation in infrastructure development. And there is, of course, the new development bank, which was set up to finance infrastructure projects. And of course, we have national strategies on infrastructure in each of the BRICS countries, and some of them were the part of the stimulus packages during the last year. For example, in India, the national infrastructure pipeline was extended by more than 1,000 projects. There were more than 6,000 projects, and now there are almost 7,000 projects and a half in the national infrastructure pipeline. Brazil also extended its investment partnership program. Russia has approved its comprehensive plan for modernization of trunk infrastructure, which is aimed at interconnection, aimed at development of interconnection between cities, at the modernization of the railway system, including Baikal-Amur magistral and Trans-Siberian magistral. And in China recently published its national transport planning outline focused on the intercities development hub and different hubs between different transport modes and so on. So all of this, all of BRICS countries have a large infrastructure agenda, but this is all lyrics until we answer the main question, not only for infrastructure, but well, relevant for all sectors. Where are the money? Where can the money come from? Here we turn to some challenges because budgets are really strained after the last year's stimulus packages. Here I have some data on 2021 budgets on infrastructure in BRICS countries. Unfortunately, we don't have any data on any official data on Chinese budget, only the target budget deficit, which gives us a glimpse of reduced expenditures because the budget deficit will be reduced this year. And there are some estimates of the infrastructure budget, which will be reduced by about 30%. No, I'm not mistaken, 30%, but it's difficult to estimate because most of infrastructure in China is financed through funds, which might not be incorporated in the current budget. And the only one who is in plus this year in infrastructure is India, which added 7% to the infrastructure budget this year, but it's negligible in comparison to what to the needs in infrastructure in India, because in India logistic costs are one of the biggest in the prices and in the costs of products, and the whole budget for transport in India accounts for about 3.5% of the whole budget expenditures, and this is on the level of developed countries. This is not the level for the developing countries, and the others are reducing their budget expenditures on infrastructure and transport and infrastructure related modes. So to finance those extensive infrastructure development programs, we should turn to the private sector. And public-private partnerships are rather developed in BRICS, but the markets are really different. You see that they differ from China with its more than 9,000 projects to South Africa with around 100 projects. And they are structured differently. For example, in Russia, you can see that there is a large number of projects, but the total value of those projects are quite small. And this is because only a few federal projects account for the most of this value. About 30 federal projects account for 40% of the total project value. And this is not the case of other countries. For example, in Brazil and China, most projects are realized on the regional level, state level in Brazil, provincial and municipal level in China. Also, for example, in India, the public public company may act as a private partner. It's not the case in Russia. Private partner should be a private company. And also in Russia, for example, most of the projects are structured more like public procurement with large capital grants of public partner or concession grant repayments and so on. So if the PPP markets in BRICS countries are so different, what are the fields, what is the potential for cooperation? Well, there is one. Actually, these are risks related to the public-private partnerships, related to the liability structure of PPPs. There are three types of liabilities related to PPPs. First, there are direct liabilities. They are clear, they are transparent, capital grants, concession grant repayments, and so on. And there are contingent liabilities, explicit and implicit, but not so many countries in the world, not counting BRICS, are budgeting and accounting for contingent liabilities. And this has been on the agenda for international organizations and researchers for some time. And here is the list of the key measures aimed at reduction of the risks related to contingent liabilities of PPPs. As you can see, there are some frameworks and there are some measures implemented in BRICS countries already. Each of the BRICS countries has implemented at least 4 or 5 measures out of this list. But there are some problems. Otherwise, we wouldn't talk about it. First, not all of the measures are implemented in a quality way. So, for example, there is an approval of a project by fiscal authority in Russia, but only those projects require approval which have a capital grant from the public partner. And in China, for example, there is a strict approval process by fiscal authority, and only those projects which are not exceeding the limit of 10% of total budget expenditures might be approved. But there are some provinces where this limit is extended. So I wonder how. And there is also evaluation of fiscal effects of a project. Yes, of course, almost all of the BRICS countries make that evaluation, but how? For example, in Brazil, they're evaluating only the revenues generated by PPPs, but not the risks. And about the methodological recommendations, this is the most controversial recommendation of the international organizations, because there cannot be a universal risk allocation recommendation for all the projects. Risk allocations are always project specific, and there are also some project specific risks in the PPPs. You cannot write down all the risks and all the recommendation for risk allocation. About the disclosure of contingent liabilities, this is the most reliable, I would say, measure for a reduction of the risks related to contingent liabilities. But even given then that 3 countries have regulation requiring this disclosure, it is actually disclosed only in South Africa. So South Africa in disclosure and monitoring of contingent liabilities can serve for all BRICS countries as a guide mark, because South Africa is really good. but it has only a bit more than 100 projects. That's much easier than more than 9,000 of China. You should agree with that. And in Brazil, they require, for example, the disclosure of contingent liabilities in each year's budget, but there is no estimation of contingent liabilities in the budget. So you open the budget, there are no estimations of contingent liabilities related to PPPs. They say that this is because they have only one federal project, which doesn't create any contingent risks. But we should include also regional projects in the contingent liabilities, because they can put pressure on the regional budgets, and these can put pressure in its turn to the federal budget. But they do not account for that. And in Russia, there is a decree on the Ministry of Economic Development, but actually only one monitoring was published, and there is only one estimate of the contingent liabilities for the 2019. About the monitoring, each country has a database, but they are not really comprehensive. And about the guarantees, this is a good measure, but only 2 countries have guarantee and quasi-budget funds for the PPPs. Also, 3 countries have limits for contingent liabilities, but as I already said, some of them are exceeded, and for some of them we don't have data at all. To conclude, the PPP mechanism is a good one for realization of those extensive infrastructure development strategies in BRICS countries. We can use them, but before the expansion of the usage of this mechanism and expansion of this market, we should create the framework for accounting for risks. First, before we approve more PPPs, we should create the system for that accounts for risks related to PPPs, and this has for a time, for a couple of years, been on the agenda for other international organizations. For example, in Russia, in G20, we initiated a research on PPP risk-related reduction for practices in G20 related to risk reduction. And this has been extremely interesting. So given that each of the BRICS countries have their fields of excellence in risk reduction related to PPPs, probably it's a good point to start for cooperation in the post-COVID era. And here I would like to stop. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alexander. Indeed, infrastructure is a key to development, and Suez crisis have reminded us all too well how much world economy is dependent on well-functioning infrastructure. So thank you indeed for attracting our attention to the importance of infrastructure for BRICS agenda and for the resilient post-COVID-19 recovery. And our next speaker is Dr. Jiaoyi Zhu from Beijing University of International Business and Economics. I hope he was able to join us.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. First, thanks for BRICS Research Center of Federal Government of Russia and Academy of Social Science of Russia for inviting me to attend this important meeting online. And actually, I'm replacing Professor Lan Qingxing to attend this forum He is the director of our BRICS Center, and I'm the Secretary General of this center. And this center is highly supported by Chinese government, especially the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And my name is Zhao Yizhu. I'm Associate Professor and Research Fellow for World Economic Studies in University of International Business in Beijing. I'm not talking from Beijing. I'm talking from the so-called Digital Economy Center of Beijing in Hangzhou, where Alibaba is headquartered. I'm in middle of the wedding of my friend. So I did not manage to prepare a presentation. I'm sorry for that, but hopefully my presentation will be something enlightening for all the audience today. And I heard most of the keynote speakers, and I learned a lot on the current situation in BRICS countries, the 5 countries. And for my speech, I would like to focus on one point only, the digitalization or the digital economy. First, I would like to share with you the information I got from my experts friends from the top state-owned hospitals in Beijing. According to their algorithm, according to their estimation, they think the final confirmed cases will be about 200 million cases, and the death toll will be about 5 million. So I don't agree with the concept of post-pandemic. We're still in middle of the pandemic. Maybe it will last for 2 to 3 years. So just to be not that positive. It's okay to be optimistic, but we still have a long way to go. And coming back to my topic today, digital economy for sure is one of the major topics for the presidency of Russia in BRICS in 2020. And actually, I think Russia played a very good role in spite of the pandemic globally. And I think in 2021, no matter what happens, the digital economy should be more and highly promoted in all the BRICS countries. Everybody knows that digital economy or digitalization has a positive effect on per capita GDP growth. But it comes only after reaching the distribution and the use of ICT in a certain critical point. This means the digital economy is a double-edged sword. It can be good and it can be bad for the economy. So there are a lot of things for us to do to make sure that all BRICS countries' economy will benefit from the growth or the digitalization of our economy. Actually, in China, we created a new concept. We know GDP stands for gross domestic product, and we have a new concept which is gross domestic netizen hour. That means the total hours of the netizens in the whole nation that spend on internet annually. So according to the statistics of China, the total netizen hour on internet has risen 30% from 2019 to 2020. So it means the pandemic is a huge boom for the ICT or the digital economy. I give you another example. In Beijing, the digital economy accounts for about 68% of the economy. That's why Beijing's economy in the very beginning, in the first half of 2020, was highly affected, and now the economy in Beijing is reboosted due to the empowering ability of digitalization of the economy. So I think this is a very good experience for all the countries or all the metropolitans to learn from Beijing's experience. And for Russia, because I read a lot of articles on digital economy of Russia, I found that from 2018, before the pandemic, the federal government of Russia has already made a very comprehensive plans on how to boost the digital economy in different areas. So, for example, according to the social and economic strategy development, the ICT will be considered to be the most efficient instrument to support economic development and the national economy's competitiveness. So I think for Russia or other BRIC countries like India, Brazil, all these countries have their comparative advantages. And for sure, China is also leading globally in online payment, online education, cloud computing, and other or big data, especially big data. We have a lot of things to share with other BRIC countries, but the mechanism is not good enough or is not efficient enough. So I would like to raise 4 points for all the countries to think about on how to establish a more efficient mechanism for cooperation in the digital economy growth among the BRIC countries. The first will be the expansion of exchange of best practices, information, and expertise on matters relating to digital development. So this mechanism should be data sharing based, and the BRICS should have a working group dedicated to this data sharing mechanism. According to what I know, the Chinese government were willing to share more big data because we have the biggest population in China, in the world. And the meaning of biggest population means the biggest data created every minute, even every second. So this is a huge resource for all of us to share. And the second point will be introduction of new indicators and the improvement of existing metrics to increase the quality of effectiveness of strategic planning to bridge the growing digital divide and cope with emerging vulnerabilities. This means because due to the different developmental stages of countries in BRICS, we should have a more efficient mechanism on making indicators and existing metrics totally shared among different governments and different entities inside the BRICS. And the third point will be a promising direction to joint promotion of BRICS common stance on cybersecurity matters. We know that cybersecurity is becoming more and more critical for the digital economy. And as far as I know, Russia and India, you two are the two leading countries in cybersecurity. So this advantage should be better implemented or better used among the BRICS country. The last point will be to increase the investment in digital economy, especially in increase of investment in capital market to boost bigger ICT companies like artificial intelligence or IP related or big data and etc. In China, in 2020, due to the pandemic, very big companies like Alibaba or Tencent, although their market value reached already 40 to 50 billion USD, still it grew about 35% of the market value. So I think also from China's side, we are very interested to set up more funds to promote the digital economy related companies' performance or the IPOs in your respective capital market or stock market. And this will be a win-win or multiple win situation for all sides. Okay, these are the 4 points I would like to share with you guys. And thanks again for inviting me, and special thanks for Ms. Valeria. And now the time for the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Jiahui Zhu, and thank you for showing us a glimpse of how the world will be like post-COVID, with a lot of digital elements, so that you can participate in an academic meeting amidst the wedding, which is a great combination, which wouldn't have been possible before. And indeed, your proposals are very relevant, that we do need new metrics to measure the performance of countries after the post-COVID, with a lot of digital transformation and a lot of the processes taking place online nowadays. So far, there hasn't been anything implemented yet, and BRICS perhaps could lead the way and create a new type of economic measurement. Thank you very much indeed. And it's my great pleasure to present our last speaker today, who will be from South Africa, Mr. Cyril Prinsloo, a senior researcher at the South African Center for the Government, South African Institute of International Affairs. Floor is yours, Cyril.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Firstly, thank you to the organizers for putting together this very fascinating dialogue, and thank you for extending an invitation to us as well. I think the agenda today so far has been extremely broad, fascinating discussion, and very grateful to just have an opportunity to share some thoughts based on our latest research as well, in terms of post-COVID-19 recovery in the immediate term as well in a longer term. I just want to check if you can see my presentation okay, and if you can hear me all right.
Yeah, it's okay.
Brilliant. So colleagues, I think today, in the interest of time, I just wanted to reflect on 3 points. I think a lot of what I will share this afternoon or this morning or this evening, some of it has already been touched on. But again, grateful for the opportunity to just reflect, or just to add some of my reflections on this as well. As I highlighted there, I think the first priority that I just want to reflect on is intra-BRICS cooperation for economic recovery. Again, in the current pandemic state that we find ourselves, immediate post-pandemic recovery, and then also obviously the goal for the BRICS has always been forging long-term sustainable economic relations. The second point I wanted to touch on, again, this is something that we've spoken within the BRICS framework for a long time, the establishment of an independent credit rating agency. And I want to share some thoughts why I think we need to revisit that idea. And then thirdly, I wanted to, something that Andre also spoke about earlier today, just focus on how we as the BRICS can address some of the supply side constraints of the global vaccine effort. Now, before I jump into these 3 points, I just briefly want to offer some background reflections from our research. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on South Africa, the economic impact on other African countries as well. Just to contextualize a bit these 3 points that I'm talking to. Now, if we look at those 4 bottom points at the left-hand side of the slide, I think one of the key things we've seen is reduced revenue. Again, we've seen this in South Africa, many other African countries, especially on key sources of income for African countries, whether it's remittances, tourism, transport, trade, or export of natural resources. So certainly this has had a massive negative impact on our economies. Estimates that last year between 20 to 30% of revenue were lost in African countries. I think this reduced revenue is on the back of already constrained fiscal space across many African governments, South Africa included, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. I think adding to this, obviously the pandemic brought about increased pressure to fund healthcare packages, to fund healthcare systems, along with economic stimulus packages. Many African countries relied on borrowing funds for those kind of efforts. And if we look at the graph on the right-hand side there, which shows the debt to GDP ratios across our continent, clearly many countries were already classified as debt distress, meaning more than 60% debt to GDP ratio. So clearly this case of borrowing more funds to finance healthcare systems, to finance stimulus packages, economic stimulus packages, has not been ideal. And then the last point on that list that I just wanted to touch on is what we refer to as the second wave of economic impact. And that's basically, we've seen a whole host of African countries being downgraded by the big 3 credit rating agencies, ultimately making debt more expensive, which is also extremely concerning to us. And I think, of course, I reflect here only on South Africa, other African countries, but I'm sure similar trends can be seen, whether it's Latin America or Asia, in your respective countries or regions. Now, moving on to my first point, I think this is something that we've touched on throughout this conversation today. I think something that we're quite excited about is the strategy for BRICS economic partnership that was launched during Russia's presidency last year. I think for me, this conversation started a little bit earlier, the year before, especially in Brazil, where we saw an extreme focus on, at least in terms of the discussion, that we want to see tangible benefits of BRICS economic cooperation. We want to see, yes, we've been having these discussions for more than a decade. What are the benefits to our economies? I think it was great that Russia picked up on that theme, revising the earlier strategy, coming up with a new strategy. Again, as we heard earlier today, covering everything from trade, investment, SME cooperation, digital economy. I think, and I think Ambassador mentioned this earlier as well, what's critical for the next stage for the BRICS, in order to help all of us get through the pandemic, get through that post-pandemic recovery phase, but also to build those long-term sustainable links between our economies. The critical thing is the implementation of this strategy. Again, it's a broad strategy capturing a whole range of elements. I think what we need to work on this year is what are the implementation strategies, what are the work plans? What tools can we use to see these tangible results that we're aiming for? And whether that's, again, I think the previous speakers spoke about data exchanges. I think also looking at cooperation, more cooperation between stakeholders at the different levels of BRICS cooperation, joint proposals, joint projects, pilot projects. I think if we create a work plan, if we create an implementation plan centered around some of these actionable items, we'll really be able to see that tangible benefit of BRICS economic cooperation. Colleagues, the second thing, sorry, the second point I mentioned was around revisiting our conversation around creating an independent credit rating agency. Now, I think a lot of us that's been part of BRICS dialogues for a long time, we know that this is not a novel idea. I think we're all well aware of some of the advantages, some of the challenges of setting up such an independent credit rating agency. And I've tabled some of those advantages and challenges there. Just as a reference, obviously this is not an exhaustive list. I think the point I wanted to make here is that as we saw during the global financial crisis, 2007, 2008, as we saw now, as I highlighted earlier during this pandemic, certainly this is a key issue, not just for the BRICS, but for all emerging markets, for all developing countries. And clearly this issue, some of the contentious issues around the big three rating agencies are not going to go away. We will continue to see this as an issue. So I think with that in mind is the suggestion that throughout the coming year to revisit this conversation. I know during the 2018 summit here in South Africa, the BRICS Business Council put forward a number of suggestions on what a credit rating agency like that could look like. And I think it is worth revisiting that conversation. Again, as we heard last year in the Moscow Declaration, it's not completely off the radar, but certainly I think something that we need to relook at and revisit. Colleagues, the last point that I just quickly wanted to reflect on, and I think again, Andre did a much more in-depth overview of the current situation. I think what I can add to this conversation is just some reflections from a South African perspective as well. As Andre rightly mentioned, both South Africa and India has been quite involved with this discussion around supply side constraints of vaccines within the WTO. And as those first couple of bullet points mentioned is how critical this issue is. Towards the end of last month, 10% of countries have administered 75% of COVID-19 vaccines. 130 countries haven't received a single dose. Clearly, this is an issue. The ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, estimated that if developing economies don't access vaccines, it will be a tremendous loss for the global economy, estimated at 9.2 trillion. Now, of course, within the WTO TRIPS agreement, I think we can all agree on the importance of the mechanism, on the importance of IP, but certainly there is a good case to be made around addressing the IP monopolies around the technology know-how to scale up production of vaccines and related technologies. I think South Africa's recent submission to the TRIPS Council at the end of February, the core, what for me was the crux of this argument is that no one is safe until everybody is safe. And as that second last point points out, the director of the World Health Organization saying, the longer it takes to suppress the virus everywhere, the more opportunity it has to change in ways that could make the vaccine less effective, an opportunity to mitigate. And absolutely, that's something we've firsthand experienced in South Africa. And again, I think why this is such a critical issue for us. And I think I just wanted to finish off with that last point. Firstly, yes, this is a critical issue for the BRICS. As we've heard before, there's various vaccines being developed across a number of the BRICS countries. I think if we look at the statistics, more than 40% of global population is within our 5 countries. And of course, we know historically, there's certain issues within the WTO framework that the BRICS haven't always been able to coalesce around. But I think on this one, certainly this is something that we as a bloc can and should absolutely coalesce around. And colleagues, I'm going to leave it there for now, but happy to take part further in some of these points during our Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Prinsloo. It was very insightful. You've touched upon so many things, ranging from vaccine to multilateral cooperation and implementation, which is really key to securing a sustainable growth in the post-COVID era. And now it's time for our discussion. We have asked our speakers to ponder on several questions, and we will put them on the screen now and invite to elaborate more on the issues. Right, just a second. Can we perhaps enlarge them? All right. The questions are more or less about the BRICS role in the post-COVID-19 era, and what could be a role of BRICS. Will it be larger? Will it be maybe on some different trajectory? And what kind of, this is the first question. And the second question is combating the challenges of COVID-19 with multilateral responses, and perhaps could the BRICS lead with their own example and transform their own agenda to provide a rapid, coordinated response for future crises, be it in health, economic, or any other kind of sphere. The third question, about the ongoing technological transformation, and can we find here a convergence or divergence among BRICS countries with regard to policies they choose to adjust their economies to digital future? And finally, the fourth question is about forging common rules in areas of people contacts, like traveling and any other interactions that require nowadays certain rules. Perhaps they will require even more rules. So what can BRICS countries do here? So these are the questions, and I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to suggest their opinions about these questions. And if Ambassador Vishnavardhan is still with us, I would like to invite him to explore some of these questions. Or perhaps we do it openly, like in a more liberal format. Perhaps any of our speakers would wish to take some of the questions, or perhaps several questions, and suggest their opinion. Perhaps Professor Golovnin, if you are still with us, can I ask you?
Thank you, but Georgi Davidovich is.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe I give floor to him.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Professor. Yeah.
Yes, I just raised my hand, but well, not everybody knows what does it mean. Well, these are very interesting questions, and they essentially boil down to the issue of coordination and more contacts and more swift reaction to, well, different calamities and setting out strategies. And the short answer to this is institutionalization of BRICS. I think that COVID has shown that we lack that kind of coordination, and that even a small secretariat could be very useful for coordinating of policies, especially these days when the issue of working remotely and communicating remotely is not something exotic, but that's the people, all of the people do all the time. So I think there would be minimum expenses for such a setup, and I think this is something that the Indian chair should think about for proposing some kind of well, master plan in the forthcoming summit, because without that the BRICS will still remain a very loose formation of countries, not a single unity, and it would be much more difficult to react in a uniform way to various challenges which lie ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tolaraya.
So when I can continue.
Yeah, Professor Golovnin, yes, please.
As I have tried to show that actually we have rather divergent paths of BRICS economies during the crisis, and I think that practically all the speakers shows the same. Either from point of view of spread of pandemics in their countries, or from the point of view of a reaction of economic policies. But from my point of view, of course, these pandemics maybe is a little bit less challenge for these countries, because either those countries which suffered more, for example, India or South Africa, probably we will restore the economy faster. So from this point of view, it seems that again we have some kind of an opportunity for emerging market economies like BRICS countries. Of course, much is dependent on their national economic strategies, and if they will be somehow coordinated towards, for example, economic growth, towards solving the problems which I have also mentioned. That it was very interesting that Professor Tolaraya presentation showed that the same problems like asset bubbles, like debt crisis are among the most vulnerable problems. So this may be the question. This may be the answer for the second question. What can be the possible threats in the nearest or even in longer term future? Of course, we cannot do everything now, because this question may be rather far-reaching. But anyway, we have already seen that there could be some small steps towards this direction. I mean, some common actions against common shocks. From my point of view, there will be some kind of agenda, which I have already mentioned. For example, some common international rules concerning the regulation of capital flows, because there is, from my point of view, the consensus that there are some threats from free cross-border capital flows, which is prevailed now. And also some kind of common deals, like some programs of new development banks. And it is very important from my point of view that CRA, contingent reserve arrangement, should work. If we look at first deals, for example, when supporting exchange rates by this mechanism and this or that BRICS country, this also could be could give some positive results. So we need some positive results. We have already seen them, like the new development bank is working and it has its own project. And also we need some results in other areas, some small steps towards this new world.
Thank you, Professor Golovnin, for sharing your views. And I see that Ambassador Vishwanathan is with us, and I give you the opportunity to express your views on these questions.
Thank you, Irina. First of all, I must congratulate the organizers for putting these 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. These are actually, you have captured the basic issues concerning COVID and post-COVID recovery. So I won't comment on all of them. I want to comment probably on the last one, particularly on the economic aspect of it. What COVID has taught us is that when there is a crisis like this, it affects the entire society not uniformly. There is an asymmetry. It is the bottom of the pyramid, as I said earlier, the poorer people who have got affected most by the economic lockdown and other measures. So COVID can teach us something for future such crises. Why I am saying this is that out of the 5 BRICS countries, if you leave out Russia, at least 4 countries, in 4 countries, the economy is dominated by what we call the informal sector. That is, people do not have regular 10 to 5 or 9 to 5 jobs. They have very informal kind of arrangement with their employers. They don't have even fixed contracts. And in India, you may be surprised to know that as much as 70% of the Indian labor works in the informal sector. I understand that similar is the case with Brazil and also China. Russia may be slightly different. So it is time that we think very deeply about how to reform the informal sector. You cannot formalize the informal sector overnight. It's not possible. You cannot give them proper jobs and fixed jobs and all that. So the idea is to come up with some new innovations by which the informal sector can be made stable, it can be made more productive, cost effective, and there is some kind of a solid social security for the informal sector. So probably NDB is the organization which is best suited for it, because NDB is not only a bank. When BRICS created NDB, we also thought that it will be a think tank for all these major economic issues. So probably NDB can and their experts can sit together and discuss this and come up with some kind of a framework whereby the informal sector can be addressed. Thank you, Irina.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Indeed, the informal sector has been somewhat neglected, not only in emerging markets, but in developed markets as well. And perhaps BRICS could pioneer certain small steps in this direction. Thank you very much. And I know that Alexander Moroskina wants to contribute to the discussion. And Alexander, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. After a year, I still don't know how to raise my hand in Zoom.
Me neither.
So I agree, fully agree with Professor Golovnin that BRICS countries are very different, but it's still there is still scope for cooperation, and there is still cooperation on the issues raised in these questions. For example, I raised an issue of responses of BRICS governments and their risks in my presentation. And the next one about inequality, I would like here to support and bring attention to the Russia's last year initiative supported by other members on the development of remote areas. Which is extremely important now because the inequality in access to digital technologies is now leading to more inequality between regions inside the country, and this is a very important question in BRICS given their large territories. And there is a scope for cooperation on this issue, because each of BRICS countries have their strategies on development of remote areas and their digitalization and so on. But these strategies differ in their ambitions and in the mechanisms used. So there is scope for the exchange of best practices, what is working, what is not working, and exchange of the experience that BRICS countries brought during this year. This is what I wanted to bring. That this issue is already what we are working on with the Ministry of Economic Development between the different BRICS countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. It's great to know about what is going on in exchanges, because this is indeed what we are here for, to exchange best ideas and implement them into practice. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask our speaker from Brazil, Dr. André de Mello Souza, to express his views, and if he's here with us, because it's very interesting what Brazil is thinking about this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm still here. And thank you for the questions that were presented. In line with what already was said, I think the future of the BRICS, and to a certain extent of the world economy as a whole, depends on our capacity to cooperate, right? And at minimum, to coordinate what needs to be done. And it seems to me that perhaps, as other instances of crisis that have come up recently, this is a time when our typical leaders, the rich Western countries, and especially the United States, they're not stepping up to the challenge. And this leaves a vacuum, if you will, that can be filled foremost by China, but also by the other BRICS. And here we have been talking a lot about vaccines because they're critical in this moment for surpassing the crisis. But I think it is important to note that since last year, there was a lot of competition as well for other goods that were very important then. Personal equipment, protection equipment, tests, diagnostic kits, ventilators. And that these were not only disputed, and in a dispute where those who offered the most resources usually took over at the end of the day, but they were even seized at some stopovers in trade routes. You know, in Brazil, we had equipment purchased from China seized in Europe and in the United States. And so this just goes to illustrate how far we have been from cooperating, and how this cooperation is critical if public goods such as health is to be provided. And we have several others, and not least climate change, that also need to be addressed. But again, the most urgent task here for the BRICS and for the world is to address the pandemic. It's a pity also that our institutions are not up to the task. This crisis has caught us in a situation where these institutions are weakened and fragmented. And I believe this also has to do with the situation of power transition, excuse me, and which also has a lot to do with the BRICS. But in a situation such as the one we had in the interwar period in the 30s of the last century, there tends to be more nationalism, economic nationalism, neo-mercantilist policies, trade protectionism, and the like. And this only makes things worse. And we don't have a hegemonic power, so to speak, to fulfill the function of providing these goods and keeping the stability of the global economy. I think we're in a similar situation nowadays. It's hard to see what's coming, but I would hope that we can cooperate more. And I think a lot of the future will depend on it. And speaking more to the particular issues that were raised, I don't think COVID-19 will lead to radical structural changes, but it will accelerate changes that were already on their way. And in particular, it tends to increase inequalities tremendously. And what we have spoken here, vaccines speaks inequalities between countries, but it also tends to increase inequalities within countries. And some of our countries are champions in inequalities, as we know. My own Brazil is one of the most unequal countries in the world, as is South Africa. And this requires a host of policies to tackle inequalities, which frankly, we have not been able to put forth thus far, but we need them more than ever to address these inequalities. And one of them is what the ambassador raised, which is informality, right? Because informal sectors, they're more deeply hurt by policies of social distances and lockdown, and they have less protection from the welfare state than others. And so we need to pay more attention to them. In Brazil, we have given quite a significant relief package last year, which cost us dearly and increased our debt to over 90% of GDP, but it was necessary at the time. And it explains part of the reason why we haven't had a decline that was predicted of up to 10% in GDP last year. We only have minus 4.1, which is significantly lower. It was because of this relief, this package relief. It wasn't very well focused, which means that people who didn't need it also took advantage of it, unfortunately. And so public policies need to be adjusted very carefully to prevent these unintended consequences. But it is, again, necessary to relieve not just the informal sector, but small and medium companies. This was already said here as well. And, and to the extent that we do this now, then these companies might survive. The jobs that they maintain might survive until the end of the pandemic, and the recovery will be a lot smoother than it would be otherwise. And I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your contribution. While you were speaking, I thought that many issues that we are talking about today correspond to the so-called SDGs that all UN members have pledged to achieve, be it vaccination, inequality, climate, infrastructure, many things. So it is indeed important to ensure a smooth recovery after COVID in order also to achieve SDGs. Otherwise, it will be a spectacular failure. So we cannot fail so many people around the globe. And also, I would like to give a chance to speak to Dr. Prinsloo, if he's with us.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I think I just wanted to add one point around what Andre mentioned now. Yes, there is a global almost leadership vacuum. We see this in the economic nationalism. We see this in nationalism just in general, countries retreating to themselves. I think we have to always remind ourselves that one of the core pillars of BRICS, of course, from the outset was enhancing the relationship amongst the 5 countries. But of course, a key objective of the bloc was also to address international governance issues, issues around WTO, IMF, World Bank, the financial architecture, again, something we've spoken about today. I think, as the new development bank was set up, it showed ourselves, the rest of the world, that we as a bloc, we can come up with institutional innovations on global governance systems that can address some of our long-held grievances. When I say some of ours, I mean emerging markets, developing economies. I think we should not neglect that as we look towards post-pandemic recovery. Again, identify those areas of global governance where there are shortcomings. How can we use our collective kind of resources to come up with institutional innovations to cross those barriers or those challenges?
Thank you very much, Cyril. I think it was a very good sum up of what we've been talking about in the discussion and during the whole plenary session, and it makes it easier for me to move to the closing remarks and to say that from my perspective, hearing all the speakers, multiple ideas, the role of BRICS in the post-COVID recovery boils down to 3 areas which are visionary. So what do we do together and how we compensate the vacuum for leadership in many practical aspects as a bloc, as a forum. The second one is institutionalization. How do we approach this issue? Because apparently without institutionalization, it will be difficult to implement certain measures, and implementation would be perhaps the third pillar that will define how BRICS countries will step into the years to come. So how we do approach these issues and how do we solve them commonly together in goodwill and cooperation will in many ways determine the path forward, the path to the future, and the path to well-being of billions of people around the globe. And I hope that with our today's plenary session, we have made our own small contributions to discussion on these important questions. And I largely think that this panel has been a success, a very great success with your insights, with your ideas, with your energy. And I would like to thank everyone for this. It was really a pleasure, and I personally learned a lot, and I hope that there will be other opportunities to meet in this or perhaps other formats to discuss role of BRICS for the future and for the world economy. And also would like to wish good luck to India, to Ambassador Vishwanathan for the Indian chairmanship in BRICS this year. So thank you all, and hope to see you again. And so we are closing this great session. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. A session very well conducted. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Bye, Andre. Bye, Valeria.